Welcome to Shredder Fanfic. Like, subscribe, and hype video. Join members to gain early access to new videos.
The main character, after dying in his previous life, he wakes up inside of Hogwarts. He teaches magic through unusual theories, fairy tale logic, and manipulation, changing Hogwarts.
The slacker professor at Hogwarts. Many young wizards who are just starting to learn magic will discover this secret. The louder you shout, the better the magic will be. As he spoke, Lockhart looked around and saw that some of the children who had performed well in the field of spells had expressions of approval on their faces, and he couldn't help but grin. Of course, as you get to higher grades and gain more experience in spellcasting, you will discover that the true essence of magic is unwavering will. Murmurs began to ripple through the audience, with some of the young wizards whispering to those around them about how they had indeed done it and how effective it had been. For example, Harry Potter seemed to have gained some insight, turning to Ron and explaining that he had indeed shouted loudly while casting the spell, and it seemed that Ron was right. Malfoy from the neighboring Slytherin house turned his head with a sneer, about to mock the other's foolish way of casting spells by shouting, when he suddenly saw Hermione Granger staring at Professor Lockhart on the stage with a love-struck expression. "Oh." Old man on the subway using his phone, JPG. He had recently seen many of his classmates being obsessed with Lockhart, which disgusted him. Fortunately, the discussions didn't last long. The prefects of each college began to maintain order in the classrooms, taking the glorious task assigned by Professor Lockhart very seriously. "I know." Lockhart strolled confidently across the stage, speaking eloquently. Some students may not agree with this statement. They would think that the essence of magic is not a firm will, but a rich imagination, or the ability to construct images in one's mind. He brandished his wand, which to him was no different from a fire poker, making a famous gesture, a perfectly standard basic transfiguration move, and his cool pose once again drew screams from some of the young wizards. The prefects had to get busy again. Lockhart simply watched with a smile, nodded to the prefects who were eager to take credit, and then continued his story. Many wizards find that when we have a good expectation of the effect of the spell, and ideally we can visualize the scene clearly in our minds, our spellcasting becomes magical and easy. For example, the restoration spell, restore to its original state. For example, polymorph and its corresponding reversal spell. Lockhart gave many examples of its application, and for each example, he would strike a pose and perform the most standard casting gesture, a gesture that even Dumbledore and Professor McGonagall, who were extremely proficient in transfiguration, could not find fault with. In this way, he quickly summarized a total of 7 types, each with detailed arguments. Unwavering will, wonderful imagination, intense emotions. He walked slowly on the stage, his golden wizard robes swaying and reflecting the lights of the great hall, making him shine brightly. He asked, "Even though we've summarized so many secrets to casting magic, we've found that none of them can be applied to all areas of magic. So, what is the true essence of magic?" He looked intently at each student, and even at the professors in the corner, noticing that they were also deep in thought, which made him raise an eyebrow. Next, he randomly selected a few outstanding students to try answering the question. Of course, being a cunning guy, he naturally chose those outstanding students who were eager to perform and were his fans. Their excellence will create a stereotype among the young wizards at Hogwarts. "Look, Professor Lockhart's fans are all high-quality fans. You can't go wrong by following him." Lockhart received many answers, but even top professors at Hogwarts might not be able to give a convincing answer to this kind of question. In fact, there is no absolute answer to this kind of question. Since you're destined to be questioned, as long as you have something to say, being questioned becomes an exploration rather than a rebuttal, and that's how you establish a more down-to-earth image. Lockhart smiled and looked at everyone. "My answer is romance." Yes, romance, the essence of magic. His eyes, full of wisdom, shone with contemplation as he spoke slowly and firmly. If I had to give romance a qualifier, I would say fairy tale romance, fairy tale like romance. He looked intently at the young wizards below, saying, "Many young wizards think that life is long and that childhood can be wasted, so they don't focus their energy on their studies. But when you leave magic school, you will find that your greatest achievement in life may be the time you spent at Hogwarts during your childhood. If you, like me, graduate at 17 or 18 and embark on a round-the-world trip, seeing so many people and things, you will discover a phenomenon. The most creative peak of many wizards' magic in their lives is during their childhood. Many of the magic spells you've learned or witnessed, if you carefully examine the records, you'll find that they were almost all invented by those powerful wizards during their childhood. Such examples abound. Take Professor Snape, for example. He invented so much magic in his childhood, and how many spells did he invent after graduation? Why is this happening? Lockhart looked at the young wizards, who had suddenly fallen silent. I think they're starting to face the harsh realities of life and are starting to lose their romance. And it's a fairy tale romance. Our romantic fantasies about magical effects, our unwavering belief in magical effects, how easily we entrusted our emotions to magic. Such romance is lost. It's difficult for an adult wizard to live in a fairy tale-like world anymore. The natural romance of a young wizard's childhood is the best soil for magic. Cherish these 7 years of school life, for it brings you endless possibilities. The knowledgeable Professor Lockhart smiled as he looked at everyone in the audience. He could clearly see Snape in a corner of the audience with a gloomy expression. Snape was obviously deeply affected by what he had just said. Then, to be more specific, perhaps the direction was already pointed out to you when you were sorted into departments. Gryffindor, perhaps it's an adventure to defeat the great Demon King. Slytherin, perhaps, is plotting a subversive conspiracy. Ravenclaw, perhaps for its professional excellence, or its illustrious reputation. He smiled and shook his head. No, it can't be defined. Everyone should have their own romantic fairy tale magic life. You'll have to go and find it. Now, let's move on to a real-life scenario and show you how remarkable the effects of fairy tale romance can be in spellcasting. I think I need to invite 2 assistants up on stage. Let's have a fairy tale performance. He looked around the crowd and murmured, I need a hero who wants to defeat the great Demon King and a wise man who firmly believes that he is right. Oh, he quickly selected his target. Even though many young wizards were actively raising their hands, he still focused his gaze on 2 young wizards in the crowd who were trying their best to hide behind their classmates. Harry Potter, Draco Malfoy, would you please come up on stage? 1 swimsuit beauties and Dumbledore. Wow! Roha has truly witnessed how amazing animated photos of the magical world are, and how crazy witch fans in the magical world can be. Holding that extremely discordant photo in his hand, he involuntarily swallowed hard. Even though he lived alone in a huge magical mansion, he couldn't help but check if anyone was around him. Obviously, there won't be anyone else. The house is protected by powerful defensive magic, so even if some wizards could turn into insects, they couldn't fly in. I hope you can guide me on how to deal with the bugs in my house. Those things make me so itchy when they crawl on my skin. He read the contents of the fan letter, pinched his nose, and tried his best to look serious as he quickly searched through Lockhart's memories for ways to deal with this pest. Yes, Roha time-traveled. He traveled back in time to Gilderoy Lockhart. Completely different from his image in the movies, Lockhart was only 27 years old when Harry Potter was in his 2nd year, and had just graduated from Hogwarts 9 years ago. In just 9 years, Lockhart, who came from a poor mixed-race wizarding family, traveled the world, personally dealt with more than a dozen powerful wizards, stole their experiences, compiled, edited, and produced more than a dozen best-selling books, becoming an internationally renowned author. Gidro Lockhart teaches you how to get rid of household pests. Gidro Lockhart series, breaking up with a ghost, traveling with a ghoul, vacationing with a she-devil, walking with a troll, boat trip with a vampire, wandering with a werewolf, me with magic, etc. Each book brought him a large amount of royalties, and with such a perfect combination of professionalism and entertainment, it was almost certain that his works would generate a continuous stream of galleons for him for the rest of his life. Moreover, Lockhart was adept at cultivating connections, from Rita Skeeter, a well-known reporter for the British wizarding newspaper, The Daily Prophet, to a chief of a remote African tribe. The number of good relationships he had built was simply overwhelming. Recipient of the Order of Merlin, 3rd class, honorary member of the League Against the Dark Arts, 5-time winner of Wizarding Weekly's Most Charming Smile Award. They even run a luxury shampoo brand. Hiss Tilda. Such a person. What would it be like if he lived for another few decades? The headmaster of a magic school. Minister of Magic. Even the chief of the International Federation of Wizards. Roher didn't know, because he is Lockhart now. All he knew was that even if he planned to do nothing for the rest of his life, and just lie back and enjoy everything his predecessor had built, he absolutely could not let anyone know the secret that he was a fake. His memories are now a jumbled mess, and he can't even maintain the most basic focus required for spellcasting. He can't even cast the most basic lock-picking spells. He's even more useless than the original Lockhart, who only knew the forgetfulness spell. Roher thought for a moment, picked up the gilded quill pen, dipped it in ink, and let the original body's muscle memory drive him to imitate the original body's handwriting to write a reply to this fiery fan on the letter paper. This fan comes from a pure-blooded wizarding family of the 28 sacred clans, and already wields considerable influence within the community. I am determined to compile an unprecedented masterpiece in the history of the magical world, even if it requires a great deal of effort and time, perhaps 10 years. 20 years. I don't care. I think this is the mission that I, as the most learned person in the magical world, should undertake. Such a long period of silence may cause many people to forget me, but it is worth it. Because I know that history will remember my name forever because of my great deeds. This gives me a reason to do nothing and just stay home. My biggest fan. Please help me spread the word. Roher's lips curled up slightly, quite satisfied. He folded the letter, selected a handsome photo bursting with hormones from the large number of photos prepared by the original owner, put them together in the envelope, fed the owl some food, and entrusted it to deliver it for him. Perfect. Roher stretched and walked to the dressing mirror to admire his own face. Besides his insightful and entertaining works, his handsome appearance is probably also a major reason why he has become the most famous best-selling author in the magical world. He was so handsome that he became a heartthrob, with a pair of clear, bright blue eyes that seemed to be full of wisdom, coupled with his meticulously styled golden hair and colorful, luxurious wizard robes. Such an image. People might easily think of Dumbledore, the world's most powerful wizard, who also had blue eyes and liked to wear brightly colored wizard robes, and imagine that Dumbledore must have looked like this when he was young. Yes, that's Lockhart's cunning scheme. He studied Dumbledore's image in his youth in great depth. Perfect. He flashed his signature, captivating smile at the mirror, a smile that had charmed countless witches. Then he quickly stopped laughing. He was horrified to see a tall figure appear behind him in the dressing mirror. They also had deep blue eyes and wore purple wizard robes. Dang! Dumbledore! Roha gasped and turned to look at the man in disbelief. Spicy. He thought he knew better than Lockhart how terrifying the person in front of him was. The only thought that flashed through his mind at that moment was legitimacy. Damn it, Dumbledore will easily figure everything out from his chaotic thoughts and then discover that he's a time traveler. The ability to use legilimency anytime, anywhere. This was almost the stereotypical impression I had of Dumbledore from reading online novels in my previous life. Gilderoy Lockhart. Dumbledore's expression was gentle, yet carried an indescribable air of authority. I've been waiting for you in the headmaster's office all day. I don't think you should still be at home at this hour. What? Roha panicked and quickly searched through the original owner's memories, finally figuring out the situation. Rumors of a curse surrounding Hogwarts' School of Witchcraft and Wizardry's defense against the dark arts class had circulated for a long time, and the mysterious death of its professor, Quirinus Quirrell, a few months prior, made it nearly impossible for Dumbledore to find a wizard willing to take over the professorship. Lockhart was, of course, unwilling as well. His life has been successful enough. There's no need for him to become a professor at a university. But Dumbledore was too good at manipulating people. He implied that becoming Harry Potter's teacher would lay the foundation for Lockhart's great fame, which was an irresistible temptation for the original Lockhart. Lockhart, the original owner of the body, agreed. And now school is about to start. Ha tilde. Is it too late to back out now? Rohan knew perfectly well what a terrible situation he would be in if he, and nobody who couldn't cast any spells, went to Hogwarts, which Voldemort coveted. He looked at Dumbledore's serious expression, opened his mouth, and wondered if he would be killed by the angry old Dumbledore if he spoke. Yes, I'm packing my things. He tried his best to make his smile seem genuine. Dumbledore simply looked at him calmly. I'll be waiting for you right here. 2. Nobody knows magic better than me. Roha felt that his process of becoming a Hogwarts professor should be described as an escort. Dumbledore grabbed his arm with one hand and waved his wand with the other, casting apparate magic, taking him directly from his front door to the headmaster's office at Hogwarts. There has never been a worse experience than this. The dizzying sensation from apparitions mixed with the already chaotic memories in my mind, making me feel nauseous and want to vomit. Fortunately, he managed to hold it in and narrowly avoided vomiting on Dumbledore. Otherwise, he would definitely die young. The moment his feet touched the real ground, Roha almost collapsed to the ground, panting heavily, his heart pounding as if it would jump out of his throat. His suitcase fell to the ground and bounced open, his clothes and belongings scattered haphazardly. Embarrassed. Extremely disheveled. I don't think someone who travels so often in magic should behave so poorly. Dumbledore's voice seemed to come from a distant place. Roha felt a jolt, and his mind suddenly cleared. He knew perfectly well how a person would be treated if they had no use whatsoever. Dumbledore was by no means a warm-hearted person, at least not to himself. Roha did not respond to Dumbledore's words, but simply lowered his head and packed his luggage. His brain had never been working at such a high speed. He didn't know why Dumbledore hadn't used legilimency on him. Maybe it was because he looked down on him, or maybe he was too disgusted to want to be contaminated by Dumbledore's disgusting thoughts. In any case, it was obviously a good situation. Dumbledore lowered his guard, so he was even more determined to protect this secret. So demonstrate your self-worth and gain the other person's approval. Hang in there. Hold on. The defense against the dark arts professor's term is only 1 year. After that, he can return to his affluent life. While packing his luggage, Roher finally got into the zone. No, it should be Lockhart. Yes, that's Gilderoy Lockhart. Everyone who asks is Lockhart. He knew all too well what his only advantage was. It was the prestige that came with being an internationally renowned figure and author, a recipient of the Order of Merlin, a third-class medalist, an honorary member of the Anti-Dark Magic League, and a 5-time winner of the Wizarding Weekly's Most Charming Smile Award. At the same time, he also figured out that this high-class demeanor was actually composed of extraordinary self-confidence, extraordinary insight, and a confident smile that is not afraid of any difficulties. Come on. Embark on your first challenge after time travel. Lockhart quickly gathered the information in his mind, analyzed and listed it, and slowly stood up. Life is always full of surprises, isn't it? He arranged the suitcases against the wall, then flashed his signature bright smile and shrugged at Dumbledore. You have no idea what I've been through these past few days. Dumbledore was clearly not interested in what he had been through these past few days. He simply sat down behind his desk and instructed the animated figure in the portraits of past headmasters on the wall to have Professor McGonagall, the vice-headmaster, come over. Oh, I haven't slept for days. Lockhart, trying his best to maintain his original persona, gestured familiarly to the high-backed chair across the desk. Seeing that Dumbledore didn't object, he elegantly swung his wizard's robes and plopped down, launching into a boastful speech. You know, I'm an expert in defense against the dark arts. I've dueled with a banshee, subdued ghouls, she-devils, trolls, vampires, werewolves, yetis. Dumbledore raised his eyelids and glanced at him, sighed somewhat helplessly, crossed his hands on the table, and finally looked at the long string of words he had just rambled on about. What are you trying to say? Lockhart grinned. I know too much to know how to choose which content to use as teaching examples. You know, I have so much experience. I've been so engrossed in my lesson plan these past few days that I've lost track of time. He gestured dramatically with his hands. Merlin's beard. No one knows defense against the dark arts better than me. Old Deng's expression turned strange. Although he said it with a hint of arrogance, he thought, you're showing off this in front of me. The figures in the principal's portrait on the wall were all chuckling. Professor McGonagall arrived quickly, and upon seeing Lockhart, she wore a stern face, seemingly not very satisfied with the Professor Dumbledore had chosen. Of course, Lockhart's purple wizard robes, the same style as Dumbledore's, also made her expression somewhat strained. As the saying goes, it's not scary to wear the same clothes as someone else. It's embarrassing if you look worse. Okay, neither of them are ugly. Looking at Dumbledore's aged appearance and recalling his glorious youth, one can't help but feel a sense of melancholy. Dumbledore nodded to her, gesturing for her to sit down, before turning to Lockhart with a scrutinizing look. Very well. Since you believe yourself to be the most suitable candidate for the defense against the dark arts professorship, and have given it sufficient time to consider, I'd like to know what remarkable insights you can offer the young wizards. These were clearly questions Professor McGonagall wanted to know as well, and she sat down, looking at him with a probing gaze. The main event is coming. But Lockhart was not flustered at all. He even felt that sitting in the chair was hindering his speech, so he stood up with great enthusiasm. A more authentic magic. A magic with an even longer history. Magic that feels closer to real life in the magical world. Lockhart pumped his fist forcefully. Yes, more practical. Professor Dumbledore, Professor McGonagall, you both know I graduated from Ravenclaw, where I received the most complete academic education. But when I traveled the magical world, I discovered that the more traditional and practical magic in this world is not what I learned. Dumbledore glanced at Lockhart with some surprise, then nodded slightly, showing a hint of anticipation. Professor McGonagall's face darkened with anger. She felt that this boastful fellow from his student days dared to say such things, which was tantamount to negating Hogwarts' long-standing teaching methods. Let me give you a few examples. Professor McGonagall was about to speak when she heard this, and she pursed her lips to suppress her irritation. Sometimes we have to face monsters that wizards maliciously summon, Lockhart thought for a moment. For example, the evil curse, the dragon emerges from its cave, which, according to our past teachings, is to use the corresponding vanish spell. But when faced with complex or urgent difficulties, unless we have a lot of experience dealing with them like I do, it is often difficult to immediately recall the corresponding incantation. After all, we can't expect the dark wizard to only use oolong. Maybe we're facing a big black dog that's drooling, or a crow that can peck people's eyes out. What's more complicated is that many people can't immediately tell whether the snake and dog in front of them are wild beasts kept by a black wizard or magical creatures summoned by him. Sometimes it's not even either. It's actually some kind of dark magic creature like a boggart, a monster that can sense inner fears. As he spoke, he leaned on his desk with one hand and his high-backed chair with the other, his gaze fixed intently on Dumbledore and Professor McGonagall. So, is there a more universal spell to solve all the problems? In the most urgent situations, can we instinctively use this spell to prevent further disaster? This is a very interesting question, because it involves practical application. Dumbledore even set aside his prejudice against Lockhart and seriously considered the question. Regarding the summons in the first half, I think the general approach I would use is to directly use all curses end when facing them. Of course, young wizards can use the simpler stop curses. He gently stroked the strange ring on his hand. Of course, based on past teaching methods, we expect students to be able to quickly distinguish whether the creature in front of them is a summoned creature, a real animal, or a dark magic creature, and then easily resolve the situation using the corresponding spell. If they can't tell, this kind of predicament is something that a big shot like him, who has been outstanding since childhood, has almost never encountered in his life, and he has never really thought about such a problem. I have too many methods, but I'm afraid none of them are something a minor wizard can easily use. He had to look to Lockhart and wait for an answer. Lockhart didn't rush to answer, but smiled and looked at Professor McGonagall. Professor McGonagall, who has years of experience teaching all levels of junior wizards, quickly provided the answer. The older Newt classes do have some complex magic instruction in this area, but in practice, we've found that not many students can master it skillfully. Of course, if you use Transfiguration well, you can easily solve any problem. However, this is not universally applicable. Transfiguration is not that simple. Alat Ascendir. Lockhart recounted the spell he had learned from an old American wizard. Even a first-year wizard can easily master this spell, and at the very least, it will send monsters flying into the air and crashing down. It is very effective in all three areas of defense against the dark arts, against dark wizards, against dark magical creatures, and against duels. Lockhart knew far too many spells like these, which were closer to slang. For example, the common banishing spell used to deal with Cornish elves and other elf-like creatures is Annoying Elf, Leave Me Alone, Pesca Pixie Pestanomi. Lockhart constantly searched through the jumbled memories in his mind for various slang and spells of local magic to reinforce this claim, showing off his extensive knowledge in various ways. Don't say it. You know what? Even the well-informed Dumbledore was unaware of the many strange and unusual spells that existed among the common people, and how they were actually quite universally applicable in many situations. Most importantly, these spells are very easy to use, making them perfect for novice wizards. I was completely stunned. He exchanged a glance with Professor McGonagall, seemingly forced to re-evaluate the young man before him who was still boasting and bragging. It seems, perhaps, Lockhart isn't as bad as people imagine. 3. I'm the only one in the whole world who has ever spoken up for you. Lockhart's speech had an effect. Dumbledore's gaze softened considerably. Professor McGonagall smiled slightly and said frankly, with Lockhart having travelled to so many places in the world, this will be an opportunity for the young wizards to broaden their horizons. Perfect. Professor McGonagall led Lockhart briskly to the professor's room she had arranged, gave instructions on the students' arrival time for the orientation dinner that evening, and then left immediately. She had more things to do. Lockhart maintained his perfect, charming smile as he escorted Professor McGonagall to the door. Only after closing the door did he let out a sigh of relief and slump against the door, collapsing to the ground. He was panting heavily. His face was unhealthy and pale, and sweat was pouring down his forehead. Tilda. He gripped his robes tightly, letting out a muffled groan. Just now, he intensely and continuously searched his memories, making his already chaotic mind even more disordered. Memory is a very unique thing. This was especially true for Lockhart, who had mastered the Oblivion spell to its fullest extent. It's important to understand that even when dealing with the same thing, the same person, or the same event, different people will have different memories. This is because these memories are mixed with too many personal subjective biases, views on people and things, emotions and feelings at the time, as well as the overall influence of one's outlook on life, worldview, and values on all memories. Now, the conflicting memories of a dozen powerful wizards are so intense that they drive one to the brink of madness. Lockhart felt as if a dozen people were chattering, clamoring, and distorting in his mind. What should I do? He didn't understand. He knew that even the original Lockhart couldn't figure it out. It's unclear whether this problem stems from the time travel or from the inherent problems arising from the original owner's unrestrained use of top-tier forgetting spells. Damn it! Lockhart took a deep breath, finally calming down, but his face was still full of worry. Am I going to end up like the Lockhart in the original story, a complete idiot? The original Lockhart was incredibly powerful, easily dispatching more than a dozen powerful wizards in just 9 years. Lockhart himself was also quite weak. His understanding of magic remained somewhat superficial. Those dozen or so powerful wizards from the common folk might be strong in practical combat and everyday applications, but their academic insights were barely worth mentioning. He didn't know how to deal with his own problems. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Lockhart stood up, walked to the window, gazed at the school castle complex, and murmured, "Perhaps we can find a solution here." Yes, he boasted to Dumbledore about how useful folk magic was, and bluntly stated that academic magic was too dogmatic and rigid. But actually, he needs academic magic even more. Fortunately, he is currently enrolled in a magic school for a 1-year term. Lockhart patted his cheeks to make himself look more relaxed before casually packing his luggage, pushing open the door and walking out. It's pointless to wallow in negative emotions about your inability to change your predicament. It's more practical to do something meaningful. In the time to come, spending more time in the library to look up information is a good idea. Seeking help from other professors is also an option. The professors at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry are absolutely the top figures in the wizarding world. Professor Severus Snape's potion. Professor Felix Frivious's curse. Professor Pomona Sprout's herbal cultivation. Divination by Professor Sybil Trelawney. Rubeus Hagrid's magical creature breeding. Madame Pomfrey's medical treatment. There are too many to count. Getting on good terms with any of them will be a huge help, whether it's a problem now or something you might encounter in the future. Lockhart strolled through the castle, and soon he caught a strange smell. It's a little sweet, a little spicy, and has a hint of savory flavor. He blinked, stunned. I've time-traveled again. Otherwise, why would anyone be eating hot pot here? And it seems to be seafood hot pot. Walking along the corridor, we soon came to the door of a slightly dark room. Looking inside, oh, it turned out they were brewing magic potions. Quickly searching through his memory for the figure before him, it didn't take too much trouble, after all. That greasy long hair was just too recognizable. Hey, Tilda. Lockhart gently knocked on the open door, his smile bright. Snape senpai. Severus Snape was 4 years ahead of Lockhart, and they had interacted with each other back in school. At that time, although Snape was close to some pure-blood classmates who admired the Dark Lord, he did not receive much help and was often isolated and helpless in the face of Potter and his group of influential figures. As a prominent figure of the new generation, Lockhart naturally had to speak out for justice. Of course, he was much smarter than Snape. He deliberately chose a time when only the weakling Peter Pettigrew was present, and in front of countless people, he righteously denounced their behavior of bullying their classmates, winning the praise of many classmates. Senior Snape, please remember, I was the only one in the whole world who ever spoke up for you. That kind of scenery felt really nice. However, this was not nice at all for Snape. When he turned around and saw Lockhart, his face turned sour. Senior Snape. Lockhart's smile grew even brighter as he walked in familiarly, warmly putting his arm around Snape's shoulder. Do you remember me? Your dear Junior Lockhart. Snape narrowed his eyes, glanced at the hand on his shoulder, and said coldly, Of course I remember. Anyone who engraves their name on the school's Quidditch pitch with magic, each letter 20 feet long, will be remembered by all the students. How? Was the original owner of this body really that promiscuous? Lockhart quickly searched through the original owner's memories and found that this wasn't even the most outrageous thing. Back in school, this guy had even imitated Voldemort's dark mark, projecting his own glittering image into the sky. Of course, he understood the original owner's thoughts. Just ask the white-turbaned women in the Middle East how amazing this is. It's an indescribable pleasure. Ha ha ha. Lockhart laughed heartily and naturally removed his arm from his senior's shoulder, because he discovered that Snape had already picked up his wand from the table. It feels so good to work with you, senior. He looked out the window at the school with a sigh. It's still so beautiful here, full of intellectual atmosphere. Most importantly, those annoying guys like Potter are not here anymore. Snape's lips curled slightly as he lowered his wand. Senior, do you know? I've talked about you with someone before, about Severus Snape, the most powerful potions wizard I know. Lockhart turned to look at him. But they don't agree. They'll talk about Asani Jaija, the author of Potions and Magic Asterisk, Libash Polach, the author of Asterisk Advanced Potions Asterisk, Evans Ivan, the author of Asterisk Powerful Potions. He rattled off the names of at least 10 potions masters before raising an eyebrow. Senior, what do you think? Who's the most skilled? Snape simply shook his head calmly. I don't care what other people think. I don't think so, Lockhart chuckled. Any master who has achieved outstanding success in a certain field has the pride of an unquestionable status. Perhaps you're still too young, only 31, and haven't yet experienced the wonderful feeling that fame brings. Proof. Snape, already impatient, turned back to stir the potion in the cauldron with his wand, his voice dry and tinged with annoyance. I don't need to prove anything. If you have nothing else to say, please leave. Lockhart, however, seemed not to hear him and continued. As it turns out, anyone who proves themselves a master of success and stands in opposition to them is naturally seen as a villain by everyone. You know, like Dumbledore and Grindelwald. Snape sneered. Dumbledore should hear what his defense against the dark arts professor is saying about him behind his back. Lockhart continued, or like you and your group of friends, like Porter. Aye. The magic wand in the cauldron stopped. Snape stood motionless with his back to Lockhart, exuding a gloomy aura. You're right, Lockhart exclaimed excitedly. You know, I was the only one who stood up for you back then. I know that all too well, but many others don't. So you need to prove yourself. That's the power of fame. Your extraordinary achievements will make those who bullied you back then a laughingstock. The wand was gently raised, and a drop of bright red potion slowly dripped down the shaft. Snape slowly turned around, staring intently at Lockhart. What are you trying to say? Write a book, Senior. Compile your own unique treatise on potions so that everyone can know your wisdom. Lockhart pointed to the bookshelf on the wall. Like all potions masters, have your work placed in the classrooms of magic schools all over the world. If you don't know how to write something that's more likely to become a bestseller, I can help you. Of course, there's so much more I can do to help you. No one in the world knows better than me how to run a bestseller. The magic wand is waved. An extremely strange force sent Lockhart flying backward rapidly. He was as if he had been squeezed into a small, twisted space, and when he was ejected again, he was already standing outside the door. Bang, tilde. The door slammed shut, completely trapping Snape inside in darkness. Senior, I see. You're interested. What are you doing? Open the door. Yes, Lockhart clearly saw that Snape was interested. His plan was clearly quite successful. He used his ability to run a best-selling book to befriend the school professors. So why did Snape kick him out? Not cute at all. Or how about we go find a cuter version of Hagrid? Perhaps this old classmate of the Dark Lord would like to make some interesting picture books for those little cuties. For the Mandrake's deadly scream. Lockhart did not find Hagrid. He may have already set off for Hogsmeade Station, located at the border between Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry and Hogsmeade Village, to wait for the young wizards to arrive. After leaving Hagrid's game hut, Lockhart encountered Professor Pomona Sprout, a master of herbalism. Professor Sprout was carrying some magical plants that had just finished sunbathing from a gravelly area by the Black Lake to the greenhouse. The plants looked like chubby little babies, with roots hanging down into the soil pots. Lockhart immediately stepped forward to help. Oh, thank you so much. Professor Sprout had more white hair than Lockhart remembered and looked much older. You're welcome. As the student you gave the most points to back then, I think I should have performed even better. Lockhart smiled brightly. Professor Sprout paused, unsure if such a thing had actually happened back then. However, Lockhart did indeed behave quite wildly back then. In order to get high college points and stand out, he reportedly memorized the textbooks and actively raised his hand to answer questions in class, earning bonus points from many professors. It's certainly a good thing to memorize the textbook, and the professor was generous with the credits. Unfortunately, Lockhart didn't keep it up after he had his moment in the spotlight. Professor Sprout looked at Lockhart with a touch of emotion, his expression very kind. Yes, you were a very outstanding child back then, but now you've grown up and come to Hogwarts as a professor. I hope you can continue to be outstanding. Oh, Tilda. Lockhart was somewhat moved. Really? From the moment he arrived at the school, despite his best efforts to greet people with a smile, he never received a single act of kindness from them. Professor Sprout, Lockhart's smile faded, and he said softly, "Thank you." Next, Lockhart didn't mention the professor's ambitious book publishing plan, but quietly helped Professor Sprout tidy up the greenhouse and prepare teaching materials for the new semester. The most unique one here is the chubby baby plant that just got some sun. Back in the greenhouse, the babies seem to have lost all their moisture and began to shrivel up, looking as old as monsters. This stuff is called mandrake, and it's an important component of many antidotes. It can also be used as a powerful restorative agent. In the magical world, this plant is extremely expensive and rare. What you see on the market are usually wild-caught. Only Professor Sprout could be so skilled as to cultivate this precious and dangerous plant on a large scale. The mature plant emits a cry that sounds like a baby crying, and hearing it can be fatal. Even young plants are very dangerous and can easily cause fainting for at least a few hours. This is still referring to a single plant. There were over 100 plants in front of me, and the combined sound of them all shouting was absolutely terrifying. We need to bury them back in the ground quickly before they wake up. Just to be safe, we need to put on earmuffs. Wait, where are the earmuffs? Professor Sprout stood up and looked at the somewhat messy greenhouse. After a moment's recollection, he suddenly slapped his forehead. Oh, damn it, my memory is terrible. I have to go get it. You wait here for me. She took a few steps, then stopped. Or if you have other things to do, you can leave first. I can handle it myself. Lockhart simply smiled and shook his head. No, no need. I'll wait for you. Thank you so much, Lockhart. You're a good boy, Professor Sprout said with gratitude and quickly left. After she left, Lockhart behaved himself and didn't move around much in the greenhouse. In fact, he didn't dare to move around recklessly. Professor Sprout's greenhouse is definitely no safer than the Forbidden Forest at Hogwarts. It contains all sorts of plants that the Ministry of Magic prohibits from being traded alive or as seeds, and many of them are extremely dangerous. For example, there's a huge, menacing vine in the corner of the wall. That thing is called a poisonous tentacle. It secretes highly toxic vine tentacles that grab any living thing that passes by, inject it with deadly toxins, and then pull it to the main trunk to tear apart the prey's carcass with its sharp teeth. Lockhart had absolutely no desire to try it out and see how terrifying it was, even though his memory clearly told him that the leaves of this thing cost as much as 10 galleons each. When reading online novels in my past life, many people jokingly referred to Hagrid as the richest hidden tycoon at Hogwarts. But in reality, every professor had the ability to easily earn more money than an average wizard could accumulate in a lifetime. He squatted quietly in front of more than 100 mandrake seedlings, and suddenly had the illusion that his hurried life after time travel had suddenly calmed down. Gazing at the dust particles swirling in the afternoon sunlight, filtering through the unrepaired gap in the roof, his thoughts seemed to take flight as well. He was actually quite grateful for this time travel. This is not because Lockhart had accumulated a great deal of fame and wealth, but because he was grateful to finally feel the vibrancy of life again. He didn't want to delve into his past life, but the experience of lying motionless in a hospital bed for the last 5 years of his life made him cherish life as much as he did. Only, it's too vivid. He frowned slightly, feeling the memories surging and boiling in his mind. It was as if, as the memories were sorted and pieced together, the emotions and feelings contained within were also pieced together, as if a personality was about to be reconstructed. And there were more than 10 of them. How to solve this? Lockhart thought of Dumbledore's pensive, which was said to be able to extract memories from the head and put them in. Perhaps this was a solution. Of course, borrowing the pensive from Dumbledore is out of the question. I'll have to use my existing connections to see where I can find such a magical artifact, since it's not particularly rare. The only problem is that he is now extremely reliant on these memories, and taking them out would increase the risk of the original owner's secrets being exposed. Take it easy. Don't rush. He told himself that. Those memories cannot construct a true soul. They are merely overly vivid memories that at most prevent him from casting magic, nothing more. Professor Sprout was gone for a little too long. Lockhart could see the beam of sunlight shining through the opening in the roof, shifting slightly. Then, the light shone on the roots and stems of several of the mandrake seedlings. The light acted like a switch, directly waking up the roots that looked like withered babies. The roots, which resembled hands and feet, flapped around and cried out loudly. Rather. Hiss Tilda. Lockhart only had time to gasp before his head started buzzing. Then he saw that the cries of these few mandrakes seemed to have awakened all the mandrakes, and more than 100 of them simultaneously emitted a scream that sounded like crying. Rather. Lockhart clutched his head in agony and collapsed to his knees, feeling a terrible tearing sensation ripping at his mind, a pain that felt like more than 100 tearing wounds combined. He felt as if his soul was being torn apart. Fortunately, he did not faint as a result. Unfortunately, the jumbled memories in my head were almost completely mixed up by these cries, with countless sounds from my memories mingling and echoing wildly in my mind. Think of a solution. Think of a solution quickly. Lockhart quickly came up with a solution. Yes, his memory contained so much wisdom that it even included methods for dealing with mandrake, especially these seedlings that look like tiny babies. As we all know, if a baby cries incessantly, there are only two possibilities. They've soiled their diaper or they're hungry. The baby in front of us is clearly not defecating. That means you're hungry. So the wisdom of a powerful witch who lived in the jungle was to feed the mandrake seedlings, preferably with nutritious food. The most rustic and down-to-earth way is to urinate into the mouths of the mandrake seedlings that are howling. The technical term is fertilization. See, it's that simple, but Lockhart is sure that most wizards don't know this secret. He struggled to his feet, suppressing the pain in his mind, and tremblingly reached to undo his belt. Merlin's beard. Professor Sprout, who was being pulled aside by Professor Snape to complain about how annoying Lockhart was startled and turned to look at the greenhouse not far away, where the screams of mandrakes could be heard from afar. It's all my fault. I shouldn't have wasted time talking to you. She quickly drew her wand and ran towards the stairs. Lockhart is still in the greenhouse. Professor Snape frowned slightly, hesitated for a moment, then drew his wand and rushed over. He was much faster than the aging Professor Sprout. He knew the flight charm. The Dark Lord taught him. He and the other two in the entire magical world knew it. He leaped directly from the castle corridor, flew to the ground, and rushed quickly towards the greenhouse. However, a miraculous thing happened. The countless wailing and screaming sounds disappeared one after another, and before they could even reach the outside of the greenhouse, the sounds had all vanished. Lockhart killed all of Professor Sprout's precious mandrakes. Professor Snape speculated with no small amount of malice. He stopped and waited for Professor Sprout to arrive before they both went inside with expressions of surprise and doubt. Professor Sprout cared about the mandrakes, but he cared even more about Lockhart's safety. He didn't think as much as Snape did. She rushed into the greenhouse, wand in hand, and quickly surveyed the situation, trying to pinpoint Lockhart's location so she could begin treatment as soon as possible. But then Lockhart was spraying the mandrake seedlings with her concocted dragon manure nutrient solution. Are you all right? Lockhart turned around, looked at them, grinned, revealing his signature perfectly charming smile. Of course, that's no problem for me. 5 opening dinner, a need for speed. Professor Sprout will never know how Lockhart handled those mandrake screams. She was very impressed with Lockhart and looked at Professor Snape meaningfully. Professor Lockhart clearly has exceptional insight. Oh, to be honest, even Snape, a master of potions, had extensive experience dealing with these herbs, but he really didn't know how to so easily stop hundreds of mandrakes from screaming. And so, whether influenced by Lockhart's enthusiastic greeting or because he already held Professor Sprout, who had taught him years before, he was pulled in by Lockhart to help deal with the mandrakes. The three of them worked quickly and finished before sunset. The three, covered in dirt, went back to wash up and prepare for the school's opening banquet. Lockhart enthusiastically handed Snape a bottle of shampoo from the luxury brand he was running, saying, "Hey, this stuff is way better than the Potter's shampoo." He shoved the shampoo into Snape's arms. "It's made from the shell of a harpy egg. You know how expensive this stuff is. Trust me, once you use it, you'll never want to lose it again." Lockhart tossed his silky, shimmering curls, raised an eyebrow, and said, "Everyone who's used it raves about it." Professor Snape, who can afford luxury shampoo and has a head of messy, greasy hair, is definitely a very promising customer. Be a refined boy. Lockhart blinked his left eye and left, leaving Snape with a strange look on his face. Unbeknownst to him, Snape silently watched his retreating figure, then glanced down at the shampoo in his hand, perhaps the only gift he had received in the last 10 years. Bang tilde. Fireworks burst into bloom. The new year's young wizards have started school. Of course, there was no classic scene of Hannah Abbott being sorted into house this year, because Harry Potter was already in his second year. Only. Lockhart looked around, but didn't see Harry Potter. Of course, it's possible that the real-world Harry Potter doesn't look like the character in the movies. After all, he himself has absolutely no connection to the character in the movie. "Professor Snape," Lockhart turned to Snape sitting beside him, "where is our savior?" Snape frowned, looked around, and then looked at Dumbledore in the main seat. After the Dark Lord reappeared at Hogwarts last school year and was confirmed to be alive, Harry Potter's disappearance is not a good thing. Yes, Harry Potter is gone. He disappeared during the brief period between his uncle's family, who could provide him with the protection of bloodline magic, and the safer Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Nothing could be more worrying than this. Lockhart could clearly see that beneath Snape's seemingly expressionless, deadpan face, the veins on his neck were throbbing, and Professor McGonagall, sitting not far away, also looked uneasy. Wow, what a child who receives so much attention. Soon, a senior ran up to the stage and whispered to Professor McGonagall, the head of Gryffindor House, that Harry Potter and Ron Weasley had not arrived at the school as scheduled. Professor McGonagall nodded, dismissing him to continue maintaining order in the college, and sat down to the side, pursing her lips. Dumbledore remained calm, turned around, and nodded to Snape before stepping onto the podium adorned with an owl relief to deliver his speech. Oh, Lockhart remembered. His memories were too chaotic. The online novels he had read in his previous life were so insignificant in the already chaotic memories, but he still managed to recall them. After all, Ron also went missing at the same time. During the summer before his second year of high school, Harry Potter should have stayed at the Weasleys' burrow. On the day of their first day of school, Dobby, the Malfoy elf loyal to Harry Potter, cast a spell to seal Platform 9 and 3/4 at King's Cross Station, preventing Harry and Ron from catching the train to school on time. So the two brave young men started Mr. Weasley's magic car and began their adventures. Lockhart could imagine how devastated the Weasleys would be if they finally made it back to this side of the platform after being unable to reach their two children, given that they couldn't get across from the other side of King's platform. So Dumbledore was probably waiting for news from the Weasleys or other members of the Order of the Phoenix, who might be operating in secret. Dumbledore was soon waiting for it. However, the news was not brought by members of the Order of the Phoenix, but Merlin's braids. "Look," a young wizard shouted, pointing to the sky outside the great hall window. Suddenly, something completely different from anything in the magical world appeared on the horizon, a Muggle car. And it's a Muggle car that can fly. Braving thick smoke and flickering flames, it narrowly grazed the castle walls, flew over greenhouses and vegetable gardens, swept across the school lawn, and then rushed toward the forbidden forest. Inside the car, Harry Potter and Ron Weasley were screaming wildly. Lockhart clearly saw Professor Snape breathe a sigh of relief, and a slight sneer curled at the corner of his mouth, as if he were laughing at Harry Potter's clumsy entrance. Professor McGonagall relaxed, a smile returning to her face, and continued directing the new students to come up to the stage for their assigned colleges. Dumbledore, however, could not be seen by his expression. He simply sat there quietly. Soon, the professors sitting in the stands could see two unfortunate kids, tiptoeing and bending over like thieves, quietly approaching the auditorium with their luggage, peeking through the window with half their heads sticking out. Professor Snape snorted and pushed back his chair, walking straight out. Lockhart sat to the side, munching on a chicken leg and watching the amusement, wanting to say, "Oh, my dear senior, these two kids are from Gryffindor, while you are the head of Slytherin. If anyone should be in charge, it should be Professor McGonagall." It is said that all desires lead to suffering, and many of life's troubles stem from caring too much. Lockhart also has his own troubles. In order to cover up his embarrassing inability to cast spells, he cares a lot about the prestige that his reputation brings, and that means he has to bear the consequences that come with fame. The screams of the fans. A cacophony of sounds filled the air. Some of the young wizards' voices were shrill, sounding no less unpleasant than the screams of the mandrakes. This situation is clearly not something that fertilization can solve. Crowded. Hermione Granger was the most excited of them all. He was desperately squeezing into the crowd, holding a copy of Me Who Has Magic with a heart-shaped label, hoping to get his autograph. I have to say, it feels pretty nice. If only these screams wouldn't stir up those jumbled memories in my head again. Lockhart managed to maintain his perfect, charming smile, kindly signing autographs for each of them and offering words of encouragement free of charge. Looking around, he saw that more and more young wizards were gathering around him. A little while later, a young wizard carrying a magic camera ran over, and Lockhart, like a social media influencer, took photos with one young wizard after another. The scene was so popular that even some professors who had finished their meals and hadn't left yet felt a little envious. 6. Hermione Granger's confusion as a fangirl. Hermione, the devoted fan, has so many questions. On her way from the castle's grand hall to the professor's office, she had too many questions. Lockhart patiently answered her questions, though in truth he was far from happy. Standing on the self-moving stairs, he smiled and nodded at the young wizard who was bowing and greeting him from afar, his feelings a mixture of emotions. He had planned to coast through that year. But when you actually face these little wizards whose faces are full of admiration and thirst for knowledge, it's hard not to have this thought in mind. Does he really want to waste a whole year of precious time for all the children in the school? My damn sense of responsibility. He cursed himself inwardly, gazing at the ancient and solemn school castle, his heart suddenly heavy. "Professor Lockhart, I've always had a big question," Hermione said quickly, one syllable after another, as if someone were chasing after her. "What is the nature of magic?" "Yes. Um." Lockhart gestured for her to come down the stairs and was about to give a casual answer when he suddenly paused. "This is an answer that requires a lifetime of exploration. It's probably too early for you to ask now. You seem to be a very talented young wizard. I can sense the pride inherent in those who excel. I think you must be even more outstanding than your classmates. Why would you ask such a question? Although the little wizard in front of me is intelligent, he is only a second-grade student. Hermione sighed upon hearing this, hugging Lockhart's book, I Am Magic, tightly. Still unable to hide her emotions, she looked somewhat frustrated. I may never find the answer. I'm not actually smart. I just work harder than others. Oh, this is quite rare. The proud Miss Granger looks utterly dejected. Lockhart smiled and asked, Have you sought answers from other professors? Hermione nodded. I asked Professor McGonagall, and she just comforted me, telling me not to worry and that things would get better as I grew up. Do you agree with this answer? Lockhart continued to ask. Hermione shook her head. I don't know, I'm not sure either. Her little face was full of seriousness, so tense that Lockhart momentarily felt that she was a little girl. I can always easily make magic work, as intended, and easily gain the professor's approval. But when I try to make magic more powerful, I can never succeed. She was so puzzled. The same magic has completely different effects in the hands of the professors, more powerful, more flexible, and with more variations. I don't know how to break through such limitations. The standard Gryffindor. Lockhart came to this stereotypical conclusion as he quickly searched his memory. Gryffindors always cast spells in a rigid and methodical manner, lacking the spirituality and ease with which magic is performed. Of course, this is a stereotype. In fact, Gryffindors often demonstrate a greater flair and composure with magic than others in the realm of combat. I've read your biography. You also grew up in Muggle society. Perhaps your thoughts on magic will be more inspiring to me. Hermione looked at him expectantly. Can you give me an answer? Of course, nothing can stump me. No one knows magic better than me. Lockhart smiled perfectly and led her onward. Perhaps I can give you the answer. This is my old secret, and it's how I easily defeated many powerful wizards. Hermione's eyes lit up. But Professor Lockhart did not answer directly. Instead, he coaxed, if you look up historical documents, you'll find that wizards who experienced major magical events were more powerful than those of other eras. For example, the four principals who founded the school were living through the most terrible era of witch hunts in the Wizarding Society. For example, the reforms to the law of secrecy 50 years ago also produced many powerful wizards, such as Professor Dumbledore, Professor McGonagall, Grindelwald, Newt, Queenie, Credence. Hermione gasped, realizing she'd grasped the answer. You mean it requires the tempering of combat? No, or rather, more than that. Lockhart shook his head. Many wizards and the new generation of auras are living high-intensity combat lives, but they haven't become stronger as a result. Auras can be considered the backbone of wizarding society, and their magical abilities in combat are arguably the most powerful group besides the Masters. But Lockhart, who was essentially engaged in the work of a dark wizard, was not afraid of these auras. Unless he encounters those big shots, he doesn't take ordinary auras seriously. Hermione was a little confused. What is that? Lockhart smiled slightly. Fairy tales. My answer is fairy tales. Hermione tilted her head in confusion. Yes, I believe the power of magic comes from fairy tales. Fantastic beasts and magical creatures come from fairy tales. Dark magical creatures come from cult fairy tales, and the magic belonging to wizards also comes from fairy tales. Magic is the ultimate romance in fairy tales. If you ask me how to become stronger, my answer is, immerse yourself in fairy tale romance. By immersing yourself in a fairy tale-like romantic atmosphere, You will soon find your abilities improving exceptionally quickly. This was Lockhart's original experience. He grasped this principle early on, which allowed him to easily stand out during his school years. After graduation, he traveled around hunting down powerful wizards without ever failing. The school's most popular figures are like the romance of fairy tales, and so are the evil thieves of life. Sometimes being a prominent figure is a natural gift, like his seniors James Potter and Sirius Black, or the current Weasley twins, George and Fred. Others achieve it through deliberate effort, such as those active in clubs or Quidditch, or those like Lockhart who diligently cultivate their reputation. The results were remarkable. Back in school, he could easily modify Voldemort's dark mark, turning the skull into his own portrait. He dared to say that many of his classmates back then couldn't do that even now. Right now, Lockhart is witnessing one of the best examples of creating a buzz around a legendary figure, Harry Potter. He called Harry Potter's extraordinary experiences and the Order of the Phoenix's schemes the birth of an epic hero. This is also part of the fairy tale. Becoming Harry Potter's professor, and one who had a profound influence on him, becoming the most important element of this epic fairy tale. The benefits of this were the fundamental reason why Lockhart agreed with Dumbledore's persuasion to teach at Hogwarts. Fairy tales, Hermione's little face scrunched up. She was a rather rational person, and living a fairy tale life. Well, she seemed unable to do it. It's important to understand that while there is discrimination within the wizarding community, the same applies to Muggles. In fact, Muggles generally discriminate against wizards, regardless of whether they are pure blood or mudblood, calling them all weirdos and madmen. Especially the kind of people Lockhart describes living in fairy tale-like lives. Aren't they exactly like that? What should I do? Hermione took a deep breath, clenched her little fists tightly, and decided that she couldn't give up trying. The simplest way is to fight the great demon king, or become the great demon king yourself. That's the purest fairy tale. Finally, the two arrived at the office. Lockhart shrugged. Of course, sometimes we have to realize the limitations of our own abilities and luck. Becoming a hero's or the demon king's follower is also a good option. 7 dark magic creatures. Pushing open the door to the office, which also served as the professor's bedroom, the two saw an owl standing on the windowsill and a large box beside it. This may be the biggest owl Hermione has ever seen, bigger than an eagle. The owl glanced at them, then continued eating the delicious food that was placed on the plate on the windowsill, specially prepared for the mail carriers. Lockhart walked over and picked up the box, where he saw a letter hanging on it. The envelope read, "Congratulations to Gilderoy Lockhart on becoming the defense against the dark arts professor at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry." The signature is from the Hibiscus Ravenclaw Alumni Association. A Ravenclaw alumni reunion? Hermione asked curiously, standing on tiptoe to peek inside. When she saw Professor Lockhart about to open the envelope, she wisely turned her head away. It's a club organized by Ravenclaw graduates. I asked the Alumni Association to help me find some dark magic creatures as teaching materials for my classes. Lockhart only found this information from his memory after seeing the package. He opened the letter and raised an eyebrow as he saw a familiar name, Alastor Moody. Mad-Eye Moody, a retired old Auror who is said to have sent half of the prisoners in Azkaban's current prisons. He helped prepare everything in this box. Moody was a Gryffindor, but his wife was a Ravenclaw and one of the founders and the first president of the Hibiscus Ravenclaw Alumni Association. It is said that tough men have tender hearts. Moody was eccentric and stubborn, but he was extremely gentle with his wife. He often accompanied his wife to help out at the Hibiscus Ravenclaw Alumni Association, working hard without complaint for decades. His wife has passed away, but Moody remains at the club where she dedicated most of her life, and everyone knows it's because of his love for her. Lockhart opened the box, and 2/3 of its volume was occupied by a large birdcage containing a group of dark blue elves. Cornish elves. His expression turned strange. Knowing the original story, he was all too aware of the chaos these little elves brought and the enormous damage they caused to his reputation. But to his surprise, it was Mad-Eye Moody who prepared it for him. Lockhart, whose past experiences almost define him as a dark wizard, and the old Aura Moody, who hates evil as much as he does. What an interesting relationship. Lockhart thought for a moment, then sat down at his desk, took out a gilded quill pen and some fine parchment paper, and began to write a reply to Moody. First and foremost, I would like to thank them for helping to prepare all of this. The most important question, however, was about the general scope of the common wizarding level, OWL, exams for 5th-year junior wizards, and the new wizarding level, NEWT, exams for 7th-year junior wizards. Both of these important exams are administered by the Wizarding Exams Authority of the Ministry of Magic. Perhaps Moody can help find out more. Out of a sense of responsibility and an awareness of his own abilities, Lockhart felt that the greatest thing he could do for the young wizards of Hogwarts was not to hinder their future. He has some methods for helping students consolidate their knowledge and practice targeted exercises to improve their exam scores. There's actually quite a lot I can do, isn't there? At least one thing is certain. Apart from those big shots, there are probably not many wizards in this world who are more knowledgeable than him. Whether it was the original owner's target of the magical world, or his target of the muggle world as a transmigrator. After writing his reply, Lockhart continued packing the boxes. There weren't many things inside, just 3 items. Besides a large cage of Cornish elves, the second item was an old-fashioned red cosmetic box, its paint peeling off to reveal the wooden structure inside. Dong, dong, dong. Someone tapped on the lid of the makeup box and asked cautiously, "Is anyone outside? Please help me. I'm locked in." Hermione, who had been curiously observing from the side, widened her eyes and covered her mouth to prevent herself from exclaiming. "It's Boggart." Lockhart flipped the box over and saw the label on it. "I've read about this monster in a book. It says it can transform into someone's deepest fear," Hermione said, lowering her voice as if afraid the monster inside would discover her. "But I didn't know it could talk." Lockhart casually set the box aside and explained to the curious boy, "Boggarts are probably the most common monsters in the wizarding world. Some boggarts that like to live in wizarding families will mimic human speech, or wander around the house in tattered robes in the middle of the night. If you're brave enough, you can even chat with them to relieve your loneliness at night." Hermione leaned back. "I don't want to talk to it. How could anyone be so bored as to chat with a monster?" "Yes, I have. And it's right in front of us." Lockhart once talked with Boggart all night, not because he found it interesting, but because this big boy who left his family in Muggle society and ventured into the magical world alone, despite making friends from all over the world, was actually very lonely deep down. "All the words I have in my heart, I can only say to the monster, and I only dare to say them to the monster. Because humans are far more terrifying than monsters." Hermione didn't think so, especially when Lockhart took out the last item from the box, a small jar with weird, colorful patterns painted on it like a child's doodle. She got goosebumps all over her body, just like a cat with its fur standing on end. An indescribable fear crept up from the depths of her heart, choking her throat and rising to the back of her throat. She wanted to scream in terror, but she found that she couldn't make a sound when she opened her mouth. She wanted to flee in a panic, but her legs felt like wood and wouldn't obey her commands. Oh no, the lid isn't on tight. Lockhart's voice seemed to come from a great distance, the tone fragmented and drawn out. She seemed to hear the professor running around in a panic, perhaps looking for his wand, because she hadn't seen him holding one before. Hurry up, please, hurry up. Hermione was about to cry. She could feel a furry little hand gripping her trouser leg and climbing up little by little, then another hand, and then yet another. She didn't know what kind of monster it was, and her heart was almost completely filled with fear. She wanted to resist, but the instinctive fear of humans facing a great threat made her unable to move at all. She couldn't even tremble. The monster moved quickly, rummaging through her trouser pockets and wizard robe pockets, then grabbing the robe and climbing upwards, causing her eyes to widen in terror. Finally, she saw a pair of dark eyes. It blinked its eyes, and upon closer inspection, one could see many dark gold patterns inside its black pupils, making it look like a pair of beautiful gemstones. Oh no, she didn't know why she had this illusion. It seemed like the monster was looking into her eyes the same way. Then two fluffy little hands reached out and cupped her head, and then another fluffy little hand reached up to her cheek, up to her eye socket, and gently tapped it. Boo Tilda. She seemed to hear the sound of a wine bottle being popped. Then her vision became very strange. The left eyeball, still in its socket, maintained its original field of vision, while the right eyeball's field of vision swayed from side to side with the movement of that little hand. Eh, 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 eh. The monster ripped out her eyes. Do not. Hermione wanted to scream, but she couldn't do anything. Just as she was about to completely break down, a warm, large hand suddenly reached out in front of her, its palm flat, revealing a pile of buttons made of cat's eye stones, perhaps just torn off from her clothes, one of which still had some of the clothes seem still attached to it. Hey Tilda, Lockhart's voice came through. Maybe you'll prefer this. Cat's eye stones are much prettier than eyeballs, aren't they? Gurgled Tilda. The monster's voice was soft and eager. The hand gestured. Here, take it, don't be shy, but you have to give her back her eyes, okay? The monster seemed to hesitate for a moment, then finally nodded, pinched the eyeballs, and put them back into Hermione's eye sockets. My vision has returned to normal. She didn't know how much time had passed, but the fear that filled her heart gradually dissipated. Hermione trembled and looked around sharply. She could see Professor Lockhart pinching the back of the neck of a small, golden, fluffy monkey and stuffing it into a jar. The little monkey is small. When curled up, it's smaller than a soccer ball and has 3 tiny arms. If she hadn't just experienced that terrible attack, she might have seen this and exclaimed how cute it was. But she doesn't want to get close to the monster at all right now. Pat Tilda. Finally, the monster was completely stuffed inside, and Professor Lockhart tightened the lid. The fear completely vanished from her heart, and Hermione gasped for breath, panting heavily. Sorry, I didn't notice that the lid wasn't closed properly. Lockhart apologized, ran to the closet to rummage through it, took out a row of chocolates, unwrapped them, and handed them to her. Eat some of these, they'll help you. What is this? Hermione asked timidly in a low voice, taking small bites of chocolate. A 3-armed creature, not very common in dark magic. It can fill a human's heart with fear, rendering them immobile so it can easily find its favorite gems. If a human doesn't have any gems, it will steal their eyes as a collection. Lockhart carefully placed the small jar on the shelf beside him, explaining, St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Injuries has specialized dark magic biologists who raise these monsters so they can harvest patients' eyeballs or other organs to soak in healing potions. Of course, knowledgeable dark wizards also use them to help create some evil dark magic tools. Hermione swallowed hard, suddenly gaining a new understanding of the magnificent and dazzling magical world. Besides the wonderful magic, it was also full of countless terrifying and bizarre things. 8. Outrageous course schedule. The black magic creature, 3 hands, method of filling human minds with fear is ineffective against Lockhart. This is partly due to Lockhart's chaotic mind, filled with various memories and noisy voices, but also due to the methods of a well-informed wizard. Or rather, one's state of mind. Courage. It's not Gryffindor courage, but Ravenclaw courage. The courage required for combat spellcasting is an emotion, and a passionate one at that, while the courage to face dark magical creatures is a state of mind, often a calm one. This state of mind is an innate ability that allows Lockhart to be unafraid of the negative emotions emanating from many dark magical creatures, including even the most infamous Dementors, the Guardians of Azkaban. In fact, wizarding is a game about talent. Fantastic beasts are to Hagrid and Newt, battle charms are to Harry Potter, magical creatures are to the Weasley twins, and even Ron, the least remarkable character in the original books, possesses unparalleled linguistic talent, easily mimicking Harry's Parseltongue and Peter Pettigrew's voice, and has a natural talent for spells and linguistic magic. Of course, having talent is not enough. A wizard must know how to make good use of his talent and even find an environment suitable for his talent to flourish. Those gifted with dark magic should become dark wizards, while those skilled in combat and possessing unique ways of adapting to the rules should become auras. Lockhart dared to say that someone like Snape, who betrayed his faith by choosing Dumbledore to teach at Hogwarts, would have been weaker than he was during the so-called First Wizarding War if he hadn't continued to study dark magic in private. Because their mindset has been damaged, and they have strayed from their own talents. Of course, people change. When one's mindset changes, one's talents also change. Who knows? Take Lockhart, for example. He doesn't mind being a dark wizard at all, so he's so greedy that he doesn't decide to extract those memories from his mind, including those of the dozen or so powerful wizards, as well as those of the original Lockhart. In the wizarding world, it's too easy. With just a little skill, you can hold your wand to your head and extract memories one by one. It's that convenient. For someone like him who inherited the original owner's top-level understanding and control over the Oblivion Curse, it wouldn't be difficult to do so. Having arrived in the magical wizarding world, he had no intention of becoming a muggle again. Instead, he wanted to find a way to digest and absorb the memories in his mind, as well as the emotions, thought processes, values, and states of mind contained within them. If he was a wizard in his past life, he would definitely be a Ravenclaw, as he was born knowing how to think about and make good use of his talents. Hermione didn't linger in the office for long. The dark magical creatures, the boggarts, were making a ruckus in the peeling makeup box, and the Cornish elves were shaking their birdcage vigorously, making her feel like these monsters were about to escape. After she left, Lockhart closed the doors and windows, then reopened the jar and released the 3 hands. Gurgle, tilde tilde. The golden, fluffy little monkey stared at him with wide, curious eyes. Its third arm, which had grown from under its right armpit, curled up between its chest and abdomen. Lockhart took a large apple from the table, broke it in half forcefully, and handed one half to the apple. Want some? Gurgled Tilda. The little monkey thought for a moment, then reached out and took the food. It tried taking a bite, and its eyes lit up. It held the food in both hands and chewed it one bite after another, eating very seriously. Ha ha ha, tilde tilde tilde. Lockhart laughed heartily, ruffling the little monkey's head. From now on, you're not allowed to leave my office without my permission. If you can do that, I can get you something delicious to eat every day, okay? The chewing sound stopped, and the little monkey began to hesitate, looking at the apple in its hand and then at the door. If you don't agree, then I'll have to lock you in a jar. I know you're a special kind of dark magic creature who loves to bask in the sun. Perhaps I can build you a little nest by the window." The little monkey clearly understood and turned its head to look at the window in confusion. It was nighttime and there was no sunlight. Never been in the sun. Lockhart looked at it with a smile. "Trust me, you'll like it. I know your kind of creature too well. Many wizards have this stereotype that dark wizards like to stay in dark alleys, and that dark magical creatures like to stay in dark and damp corners. This three-handed creature was obviously arranged in this way by the person who kept it. Distinguishing between wild and domesticated dark magic creatures is simple. Dark magic creatures that have been in contact with humans for a long time can understand human speech and communicate more easily, which is easy to determine. Who knows which dark wizard Mad-Eye Moody got his hands on from? Gurgled Tilda. The little monkey finally nodded and stretched out its third hand, raising it to its eyes. Lockhart shook hands with it, and the deal was officially finalized. This does not mean it fully endorses the deal, but rather that it has decided to try cooperation. If it later discovers that such cooperation will greatly harm its own interests, it will no longer pursue the partnership. But this is a good start. Taming a dark magic creature is no easy feat. Lockhart could have simply put it in the jar. Dark magic creatures are not creatures in the conventional sense. They do not have the same basic needs as living beings, such as eating, drinking, defecating, aging, getting sick, and dying. They also do not have the ability to reproduce. In academic terms, they are called non-existent or non-human paranormal phenomena. But he was also too lonely. He also had too many things he couldn't tell anyone and dared not tell anyone. Keeping a monster as a pet was a good choice. From now on, you'll be called Little Golden Retriever. Lockhart chuckled as he named his new pet. But his smile quickly faded. As he sat down at his desk and began his work, intending to take the year's teaching tasks seriously, his gaze suddenly froze. What the hell is this? He couldn't help but scream, which made the little golden retriever turn its head to look at him in confusion. Lockhart was so shocked that he was completely dazed, his pupils dilating violently. The little golden retriever, carrying an apple in its mouth, climbed up the chair leg onto Lockhart's shoulder. Its little head bowed as it looked at the thin piece of paper in his hand, wondering why its new owner suddenly felt a strong sense of fear. This is something even it couldn't do. That's how it was done, with just this piece of paper. It tried to read it carefully, but couldn't understand the words on it. The content on it was the defense against the dark arts schedule, which was nothing special. The key point was that Lockhart had no idea what an absurd concept it was, that a school with 7 years and 4 houses had only one defense against the dark arts professor. Furthermore, unlike potions or transfiguration, which teach 2 houses simultaneously, blacksmithing is taught separately for each house. The first year is all right. Each college only has 1 class, so there are only 4 classes for all 4 colleges. From the 2nd to the 4th year, there are 2 classes, so for the 4 colleges, there are 8 classes. 5th grade is a combined class of 2 lessons, which makes a total of 8 lessons. In 6th and 7th grade, the 4 colleges finally merged their classes, creating large classes. That means you have to attend 40 classes a week. The entire schedule is packed full, leaving no spare time. But that's not all. The professor also has a crucial newt class, which consists of students he selects to continue teaching after the 5th-year ordinary wizarding level exams, in preparation for the ultimate wizarding exams. This part of the teaching does not have a timetable. It requires consistent weekly instruction from the teacher, essentially like mentoring an apprentice. Hiss, tilde, tilde, tilde. Lockhart gasped sharply, feeling as if he almost fainted. He suddenly felt a deep respect for Snape, since if he remembered correctly, Snape had worked part-time as the defense against the dark arts teacher for a period of time in the original story. Part-time? Are you kidding me? How did you do that? Originally, he was in charge of potions, part-time defense against the dark arts, the headmaster's duties, night patrols of the campus, relentlessly targeting Harry Potter, and various school affairs, such as hosting Quidditch matches, etc. Of course, there's also the ridiculously heavy workload of lesson preparation and homework grading. Could it be that Snape is too busy to wash his hair? No, no. Lockhart was horrified to discover that Snape was not currently working a part-time job. Given the current workload and his past impressions of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, the two busiest professors were probably himself and Professor Binns. Professor Binns is a ghost, so of course he can go without eating, drinking, or sleeping, but he can't. If he continues like this for a year, he might become the second Professor Binns. With this kind of workload, there's absolutely no need for Voldemort's curse. Who could possibly do that? Professor Dumbledore. Professor Dumbledore. Lockhart grabbed the timetable and rushed toward Old Deng's office without hesitation. He couldn't wait a moment longer. Since he didn't have the password for the principal's office access, he could only stand at the door and shout loudly. In fact, he knew he should go to Professor McGonagall, as the course schedule was most likely arranged by her, and Dumbledore probably didn't personally handle it. However, it is indeed inappropriate to disturb a lady in the middle of the night. After calling for a while, the huge stone beast at the door finally closed its wings. Lockhart rushed to the automatic spiral staircase behind the door and entered the office. Dumbledore was sitting at his desk, wearing a pink wizard's robe studded with many silver moon and star sequins, with a steaming cup of coffee and a large number of documents in front of him. Hearing footsteps, he looked up, a glint of light flashing in his crescent-shaped glasses. He narrowed his eyes. It's not a good idea to have such a dark magic creature running around the school, Professor Lockhart. Lockhart paused for a moment, then realized what was happening and quickly pulled the little golden retriever off his shoulder and stuffed it into the pocket of his wizard robe. The way Dumbledore was treated so roughly and casually with such a powerful dark magic creature caused him to raise an eyebrow, a hint of inexplicable surprise in his expression. Is there something you need so late at night? Lockhart opened his mouth, looked at the imposing Dumbledore, and suddenly didn't know what to say. What did you say? You think the workload is too heavy? This was a shocking thing for him, but it was probably nothing out of the ordinary for Dumbledore, who had been a defense against the dark arts professor at Hogwarts since his youth. That's how it is. Lockhart reacted incredibly quickly. In the short time it took him to walk from the doorway to his desk, a great idea had already formed in his head. I have a great idea about teaching. I don't know if you have time. I'm sorry I was so excited that I didn't notice the time. Dumbledore gestured for someone to sit down in the empty chair opposite his desk, took off his glasses, and leaned back wearily in the chair. Please speak. 9 anyway. The blacklist department is already this bad. Fairy tale. Dumbledore fell into deep thought. His life experience was so rich that he could easily find too many cases that matched Lockhart's fairy tale theory. Yes, magic is the ultimate romance of fairy tales. Lockhart repeated the sentence. As a wizard who has grown up in Muggle society, I feel this all too well when I enter the school. Professor Dumbledore, you probably can't understand that wonderful experience of stepping into a fairy tale world. That experience made me extremely fascinated by magic, even to the point of having too many wild fantasies, which brought more possibilities for my spellcasting. You can seek confirmation from wizards who have transitioned from Muggle society to wizarding society. Of course, I think I'm the one who understands this theory the best. This statement may not be an exaggeration. From the time Lockhart entered Hogwarts as a child until he entered the magical world, although there were various difficulties to overcome, most of his life was actually smooth sailing. He easily obtained a social status that even wizards from pureblood families with deep roots could not achieve. Take Snape, for example. He also grew up in Muggle society, but for him, entering the magical world probably didn't bring him any romance. The little golden retriever curiously peeked out from the edge of the wizard's robe pocket, peeking out half of its fluffy golden head as it looked at Dumbledore across from it. This was only the second wizard it had ever seen who was unafraid of its own abilities. It then looked at the shelf on the table, where a large, fiery red bird was staring at it menacingly, which frightened it so much that it shrank back into its pocket. Lockhart picked a grape from the table, put it in his pocket, and handed it to the grape, patted its head to signal it to be quiet, and then looked at Dumbledore expectantly. "What do you intend to do?" Dumbledore asked, his fingers interlaced on the table, his gaze full of scrutiny. "I know we shouldn't rashly change Hogwarts' teaching style and pace, so I plan to incorporate fairy tale-style exercises into the curriculum." Lockhart's idea was extremely cautious, and he looked at Dumbledore with great care. But having only one student from each house per class is far too few to complete such a drill. I desperately hope that every young wizard can participate, or at least that all 4 houses in 1 year take such a class together. Believe me, I think I have some understanding of why schools divide students into colleges, but I want to say that the fairy tale-like simulation should be a joint effort by students from colleges with different styles. The Dark Lord or the ambitious one can be Slytherin, the wise scholar can be Ravenclaw, the hero can be Gryffindor, and the doer and the one who contributes quietly can be Hufflepuff. Of course, sometimes trying to let them play different styles of roles, or even switching roles, might be easier to broaden their horizons. What do you think? Genius. With 4 colleges teaching together, the course volume was reduced to 1/4, and the amount of lesson preparation was also reduced to 1/4. Dumbledore didn't answer immediately, but fell into thought. After a moment, he looked at the photos of the headmasters on the wall. Perhaps someone can help me summon Professor McGonagall. There is a play. Lockhart's eyes lit up, and he waited expectantly with Dumbledore for Professor McGonagall's arrival. Professor McGonagall arrived sooner than expected. The beginning of the semester was busy, and she was not resting at this time. She was giving a speech to the prefects, and she was not far from Dumbledore's office. Lockhart's suggestion was more than just a change in teaching methods for her. It involved a complete overhaul of the schedule for all the teachers and students at the magic school, and heaven knows how much time she would have to spend getting it sorted out. But Professor McGonagall, who seemed rigid and bound by rules, was far more adaptable than Lockhart had imagined. She only pondered for a moment before agreeing with the view. I'm not sure if Professor Lockhart's opinion is correct, but I must say, Professor Dumbledore, the past educational results of our defense against the dark arts course at Hogwarts have not been satisfactory to me. I look forward to the possibilities that the knowledgeable Lockhart may bring. The implication is that since the Black Defense Division is in such a terrible state, why not let Lockhart give it a try? This. Lockhart looked at Professor McGonagall, who was looking at him with expectation, and was suddenly moved. It feels so good to be trusted. Perhaps this is precisely Professor McGonagall's personal charm. She is willing to give those who recognize her more opportunities to showcase their abilities. Just like Harry Potter, a first-year student, was given the opportunity to participate in Quidditch, a game that was crucial for the house's ranking. Perhaps Harry felt the same way I did back then. It was moving, but also stressful. Fortunately, the ability boost brought about by the fairy tale atmosphere was not something Lockhart made up. It was the reason why the original owner's strength increased so rapidly. Lockhart didn't mind revealing this secret to the public. The original owner of this body thought the same thing. The original owner of this body simply wanted to maximize the value of this secret, which is why she didn't include it in the book. He plans to maximize his contribution to Harry's heroic fairy tales, ultimately publishing a book based on real-life examples to achieve the greatest possible reward. The benefits include self-improvement, the reputation of being an education master, the profits from publishing books, enhanced relationship with Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, the gratitude of so many students who have benefited, and future connections. Looking back at the original work, Lockhart did indeed do this. He often had students come up to the stage during class to act out the characters from his book's battle stories. The problem was that he lost his classmates' trust early on and failed to create a good atmosphere for them to immerse themselves in the adventure fairy tale characters, which resulted in a really bad outcome. So much so that in the original book, Harry and Ron were furiously criticizing this foolish move, and even Hermione, a big fan, couldn't refute it. Now, can he do this well? Lockhart, seeing the expectant looks on Professor Dumbledore and Professor McGonagall's faces, flashed a perfect smile, stood up, and solemnly declared, "Just you wait and see. No one knows magic better than me." He will fulfill the original owner's regrets and resolve the original owner's unfinished business, and he will do it to the best of his ability. Then he will completely devour, absorb, and digest the original body's memories. At the very least, he will possess the original body's strength. The top-tier Oblivion Charm, along with barely usable Apparition, Cleanse Charm, Lockpicking Charm, Simple Healing Charm, and all the other skills the original user honed through numerous adventures. The next day, the first class of the new school year is an extremely special experience for every young wizard, as Professor Lockhart will be conducting an experimental large class for all young wizards, witnessed by Professors Dumbledore and McGonagall. 7 grades attend the same class together. Anyway, Professor McGonagall actually arranged a lively class, and almost all the professors were affected by the class adjustment, so they simply came to sit in and see what Lockhart had to say. "He's such a show-off." Ron couldn't help but complain from the corner as he followed everyone to the auditorium, since there was nowhere else in the school that could accommodate so many students at the same time. "Ron," Hermione exclaimed, displeased. "I don't think you should speak so ill of a professor who wants to teach you so much valuable knowledge." "Oh, really?" Ron chuckled. "You didn't seem angry when we were talking bad about Snape before." Hermione was furious. She turned her face away, indicating that she never wanted to talk to him again. Soon, the auditorium quieted down under the organization of the grade leaders. Our conspicuous Professor Lockhart, dressed in a magnificent pure gold wizard's robe, strode briskly onto the stage. He had just been inquiring about the previous teaching progress from the older students, and to give them a little test, he had selected a few students to cast the loud voice spell on him. "Plans are in place. Students." His voice carried to every corner of the great hall. Because it was too loud, he quickly lowered his voice and spoke in a more steady tone, first telling a few interesting stories about defense against dark magic to warm up the atmosphere. Then he smiled and looked at all the students, as well as Professor Dumbledore, Professor McGonagall, and Professor Snape, who had come to listen in from the corner. Well, almost the entire school came. He wasn't intimidated at all. In fact, he was quite excited, because he knew that the stereotype of him as a magic master would begin with today's lesson. This is called a good start. Now, let's get to our main topic today. What I want to discuss with you today is the true essence of magic. See, nothing elevates one's sophistication more than a topic like this. 11 reckless, scheming, and flame-stirring. The two young wizards seemed somewhat displeased. Let's give them some encouragement. Lockhart clapped loudly and shouted their names. This is where the advantage of having fans comes in. His actions often receive a great response. Hermione, who was trying to give Harry some last-minute tips, quickly stood up and joined in the enthusiastic applause. People have a herd mentality, and suddenly the entire auditorium was filled with cheers. Draco Malfoy was initially reluctant, but as countless eyes turned to him and his Slytherins cheered him on, shouting things like, "Well done! Get your act together, and don't embarrass yourself." Tom. Oh no, it's Harry. Draco was beginning to understand what Lockhart meant by fairy tale romance. Wasn't this the scene he had been waiting for, the one that everyone was watching? He drew his wand with a flourish, glanced at Harry sideways, gave a defiant and contemptuous smile, and swaggered toward the platform. Could Harry tolerate such an arrogant attitude? He instantly overcame his fear and followed with firm steps, his eyes serious, as if he were about to kill a great demon king. Yes, Professor Lockhart guessed correctly. In his eyes, Draco was a great evil. Oh no, not quite a great evil, just an evil Slytherin. He even defeated the evil Voldemort when he was in first grade. Soon, the two of them came up on the stage. A fighting spirit is rising. Professor Lockhart reached out and grabbed their shoulders to suppress their restlessness, then whispered in a devilish voice. Now, use your stereotypes and imagine this evil Slytherin is a cunning and ruthless schemer. He seems to be plotting something all the time, and you must bravely stand up and stop him. Save the world. Harry Potter nodded. It wasn't difficult, because he felt that Malfoy was exactly that kind of person, and he himself was doing something to stop an evil plot. Lockhart then said to Malfoy, "Now, imagine that you are doing a great and righteous thing, and that there are always some unreliable brutes who want to ruin your plans." He gently guided. They are not even willing to listen carefully to your thoughts or analyze your plans. They just stubbornly believe that you are evil, so everything you do is evil and must be opposed. You hate it very, very much. Draco pursed his lips and nodded slightly. To be honest, Professor Lockhart's words made him a little obsessed with Harry Potter in front of him. I know this is difficult for you, wanting to immerse yourselves in this groundless, fairy tale-like romance, but believe me, if you try to immerse yourselves in the atmosphere of this fairy tale character, you will gain unprecedented power. Malfoy wanted to sneer and say that it was not difficult at all. He just really disliked Harry Potter. But he suddenly realized that Harry Potter was trying very hard to enter the atmosphere Lockhart was describing, and his expression immediately froze. He quickly focused on listening to Professor Lockhart's whispers. He didn't want to lose all of this. Very good. Lockhart watched with satisfaction as the two children began to stare at each other with cross eyes, then looked at all the young wizards below the stage. A key element of fairy tale romance is fighting with an immense sense of mission under the world's watchful eyes and the expectations of everyone. Now cheer for your favorite students and shout their names. In just a moment, the roof of the entire auditorium was almost blown off. Harry tilde. Malfoy tilde. Harry Potter tilde. Malfoy tilde. Savior tilde. Malfoy tilde. The people on stage were trying to kill each other with their gazes, while the people below were shouting themselves hoarse in a competitive manner. As if infected by this atmosphere, Malfoy and Harry's expressions changed. To ensure that no unexpected incidents occurred that he couldn't handle, Lockhart simply invited the professors up on stage, saying it would allow them to observe the performance up close. They also claimed that the fairy tale plot of a hero fighting a demon king, and the expectations of elders are especially important. This put even more pressure on Malfoy and Harry. But that's the magic of the atmosphere. So many people were calling their names. Harry was panting so hard he felt like he was about to crush his wand, and Malfoy was taking deep breaths. Their emotions were completely ignited. Let your duel begin. Lockhart waved his wand and gracefully stepped back, giving the stage to the two young wizards. He retreated until he was behind the professors, and of course, no one paid any attention to him anymore. Even Dumbledore watched this scene thoughtfully, observing Harry's state with great interest. Draco Malfoy was the first to make a move. He couldn't be bothered with any dueling etiquette with Harry, a brute. Completely immersed in the fairy tale romance atmosphere, he naturally unleashed his most skillful and seemingly most evil magic at this stage. A dragon has emerged from its cave. With a flick of his wand, a dark shadow shot out from the tip of the wand and landed on the ground. It was a giant python. Perhaps it was a firm will. Perhaps it was the wonderful imagination brought about by the atmosphere, or perhaps it was an overwhelming emotion. Oh no, it should be said that we were immersed in a fairy tale romance atmosphere. Malfoy once genuinely believed himself to be a leader, attempting to change the disciplined world. Looking at the disgusting brute in front of him who opposed him without asking any questions, acting as if he were a hero fighting a demon king, he felt immense annoyance and loathing. And then the wonderful moment arrived. Unlike the snakes that had transformed into snakes less than 2 meters long in the past, the giant python in front of me was coiled up, and its length was unknown. Its thick body alone was larger than my head. The gasps of surprise from the audience made him feel incredibly wonderful. Then, disarm you. A dazzling light rushed towards him, and before Malfoy could react, he and his wand were sent flying. Not only him, but even the giant python he had transformed into also took to the air. Bang tilde. He flew straight to the edge of the platform and crashed into a pillar before finally coming to a stop. Before he could even catch his breath, his pupils dilated in shock as he stared at the dark figure before him, screaming in terror. No. Bang tilde. The giant python slammed down on him, nearly knocking out his dinner from the night before. Professor Snape, who had been standing to the side with great anticipation, glanced down at Malfoy at his feet with some disdain, bent down, grabbed him, and dragged him to the opposite side of Harry Potter, signaling for the battle to continue. That's the best escape from the cave and disarming charm I've ever seen, Professor Felius Flitwick exclaimed excitedly, waving his arm and looking up at Lockhart. You've unlocked their potential, Professor Lockhart. Lockhart flashed his signature charming smile, raising an eyebrow with a smug look. How was it? Interesting, wasn't it? Yes, Professor Flitwick exclaimed. Immersed in fairy tale romance, even magic becomes wonderful. What a great discovery. 12 Python, Parseltongue, and the good guy. Lockhart wasn't actually as smug as he appeared. In fact, he had to admit that he was a little jealous. Watching the two young wizards cast spells over his own eyes made him incredibly excited about magic, but the wand he held in his hand was practically no different from chopsticks. The fairy tale romance that the original owner comprehended greatly enhanced Harry and Draco, so much so that he began to feel a little envious and jealous. He also longed for magic. He also craves strength. He took a deep breath and turned to observe the expressions of the professors around him. Seeing Draco being knocked away again, Professor McGonagall looked worried. With a bright smile, he strode forward, ready to stop the duel between the two young wizards, Harry Potter and Draco Malfoy. Enough. It's perfect enough. Just then, Malfoy quickly waved his wand, and the giant python behind him slithered over rapidly. Judging from its flicking tongue, it seemed that Harry's disarming spell had completely enraged the creature. Faced with such a terrifying scene, Harry did not flinch, but stared intently at the snake, hissing as he did so. Good heavens, all the professors present immediately changed their expressions. Lockhart's expression hardened. Damn it, an unexpected situation had still occurred. Harry Potter, you really know how to steal the spotlight. This is my stage. I'm the main character. Today is the most important stage